Is this on? Good evening. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Can everyone please take their seats? Awesome. Okay, Broomfield. On behalf of the Mayor and City Council, I'd like to welcome all of you for attending this forum tonight. We are going to be selecting a new city and county manager. As many of you know, Charles Ozaki, who has been our city and county manager for the last 11 years, although he's been with Broomfield for 37 years, he's retiring in August. And we had an employee forum last week, and I asked people to raise their hands if they had been born before 1968, because, I know, right? I can answer it. Because George DeCero was our city and county manager for 43 years, starting in 1968. Charles came on in 1982 and then was appointed city and county manager in 2011. So we have not done this in a while. So we're really excited that you're all here tonight. Just to go through the process, we started a nationwide search. We did interview 7 candidates. We narrowed that down to 4, and then we narrowed it down further to the 2 that you're going to see here tonight. So we are really excited. We have Jennifer Hoffman, and we have Jim Palahniuk. And before I hand things over to Amy, I wanted to just say that we have comment sheets for the folks in the audience that you can submit to us at the end of the night. We also have question sheets that you can give to us. We have Ann Broker here from the city manager's office, and we have Sam Pierce here from HR, and they'd be happy to take those questions. And then I'm going to put them in a hat, and we're going to pull those questions at random. The candidates are going to answer each question, and then we'll have an opportunity at the end for you to mingle with them if you like. And I'm going to turn over the microphone to Amy. She's going to talk about the ground rules. And Amy, take it away.
All right, thank you, Suzanne. Good evening. I'm Amy Collins, also in Human Resources. Thank you very much for being here tonight. We greatly appreciate it. City Council has a tough decision to make, and your feedback is a crucial piece of this process. So as Suzanne mentioned, there are forms in the back of the room. Be sure to grab one of those. Also, we put the candidates' names in a hat and drew the names from the hat. Jim's name was picked first, so he'll be number 1. Jen is number 2. Second, each candidate has 3 minutes to tell who they are. Third, audience members have the opportunity to write down a question which could be answered by the candidates. We will draw the questions at random. Each candidate will have the opportunity to answer the questions. We will rotate who answers first and second. Each candidate will have 3 minutes for each question. Since we have 2 candidates tonight, as we go through the questions, if each candidate can stay at the podium, and then we will ask you the next question and cycle through the questions. All right, and before we get started, let's go over the ground rules. If everyone can be present, listen, be polite, shut off your cell phones if you can, be engaged, be generous with your thoughts. Please hold the applause until the end. And if we're ready, we'll get started. Again, each candidate has 3 minutes to introduce themselves. Jim will go first, then Jennifer. And thanks to Amy Wells, she will be handling the timer for us tonight. Thank you, candidates, for letting us to get to know you better, and we'll get started. Jim.
Thank you, Amy. Good evening, everybody. My name is Jim Palahniuk, and I currently serve as the city administrator for Racine, Wisconsin, which is a city in southeast Wisconsin of just over 78,000 people, and I have served in that position for the last 2 years, which means that for the last 31 years, I have worked in local government. So when I look back on that time frame, I kind of started out when I was still in high school, believing that I really wanted to do something that made a difference in people's lives. And I sort of hit early on that that should be government. And I didn't necessarily think that I would be all that good or have an impact in either the federal or the state government. So I really thought that local government was where I wanted to be. And I came upon this idea of a city manager job, and I really set out saying, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to make a career out of. So I went on to Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and got bachelor's and master's degrees in order to set out on that career path to be a city manager. And oddly enough, I didn't take the more normal route, which would be typically to start in a large organization at the lower end and sort of work your way up. I actually did the less likely thing, which is start in a very small organization, a very small city, and become the manager. But the nice thing about that was it allowed me to really learn every aspect of the business, because you're forced to. There's not a lot of resources when you do that. So I became the village manager of Dexter, Michigan, right out of grad school. Spent 4 years there. And then, of course, in order to further your career, when you do that, you really have to leave and go to larger communities. So I wound up going to 2 other communities in the state of Michigan over the course of the next 15 years. Went on to Rio Rancho, New Mexico, where I served as city manager there for a 4-year time frame in which it was one of the fastest growing cities in the United States. And then from there, I had sort of the opposite experience. I went on to North Carolina and wound up in an old textile mill community, Gastonia, and it was one of the worst economic recessions that we've seen in decades, and then managed through that. Managed for 10 years ultimately in North Carolina. Did a short stint as a director of economic and business development for a larger city in Fayetteville, and then ultimately on to Racine. So of my 31 years, I've spent 30 of those years actually as a city manager in a number of communities in a number of states, and it's really given me the chance to learn every possible aspect of local government, to sort of have success and failure and learn from both along the way, but realize through all of it that I still very much enjoy what I do. I love local government. I find personal fulfillment every day, and I really want to continue doing it. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. Jennifer.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Hoffman. I'm currently the Assistant City County Manager in Broomfield. I've been with Broomfield for 18 years in 5 different capacities, 10 of which have been directly related to the city manager's office, 4.5 of which is in my current position. My husband likes to say that although our house is in Denver, our community is Broomfield. I've grown up with Broomfield. I've cut my chops from a leadership perspective, management perspective, economic development perspective. I love the community and deeply tied. Unlike Jim, who had the benefit of knowing what he wanted to do early, I'm still discovering that. So the path actually chose me rather than me choosing the path of leadership and city management. I have my undergraduate degree in criminal justice, political science. Went back in 2011 at the prompting of our city leaders in order to get my master's of public administration, which was one of the greatest things that I was able to do from an application perspective. I think when you get your education back to back without having the ability to apply it, it gives you a very different sense of what's available. So from the application piece and having the opportunity to grow and fail and learn and achieve and fail in the city and county of Broomfield, some of the opportunities internally and externally, I led the local, state, and federal legislative affairs until 2 years ago when we were able to identify Ann Lane, who's then been able to kind of pick that up, which allowed me to do a deeper dive into city-county management and leadership, shifting from a siloed approach to a more collaborative effort. Participating on the City County Managers Association for Colorado has allowed me depth and breadth to understand and learn what some of the other communities are doing in Colorado. My relationship with ICMA, which is the International County Management Association. I'm going to take a breath here. I'm a little nervous. Has also allowed me to really get my legs under me for what is possible and what is not possible, to be able to lean in and be brave enough to take bold choices and to develop a team that hasn't necessarily been down the road that any of us have been down before. I'm proud to serve on Precious Child, which is one of Broomfield's pillars for nonprofits in the community. I lead the Emerging Leader Government for Empowering Women. From a robust, round approach, there isn't anywhere I'd rather be. I don't want to be city manager anywhere else, only here, because I don't want to live anywhere else other than here. I appreciate your time tonight. It's a valuable asset for this community to be engaged and activated, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend the evening with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right, so we're going to move on to the question and answers round. The audience has submitted questions, and so we're going to draw those questions at random. And candidates, each of you will be answering the same question, and you'll have 3 minutes for each question. The timer will be reset, and the order will be Jennifer will have you up first.
Tag team.
All right, so question number 1. How do you balance industry needs with community needs?
I'm sorry, industry needs?
Industry needs with community needs.
Well, it's the same achievement that we try to do in our personal lives of finding balance. I think oftentimes it's a misnomer. Broomfield has been experiencing that balance since 2012 and before, although we've had a pivotal point in our community with regards to oil and gas. It's been probably the best and worst professional and personal experience any one of us in city management and our community has had. It's challenging, but it does allow for the disconnection and disruption to occur so that the fabric of our community can come back together. So how do we manage it? We manage it carefully, thoughtfully, understanding and having a space, which is really our role, to provide a space for diverse opinions. I think through not only from oil and gas perspective, but when we think about economic development and we think about that blend, we think about commercial versus retail, all of which comes to a head with regards to our oil and gas and the what's next. Visioning for our future requires us to take a totality of circumstances with regards to development, going back to the residential and commercial, going back to our comprehensive plan, our master plan, our financial plan. All of it has to be weighed. And part of that is creating that vision for the future so that it's not piecemealed. We need to enhance and constantly review. So rather than a 5-year plan, it may be a solidified 5-year plan, but it really does need to have that financial component, the land use component, what is and what isn't acceptable as we move forward. So more of a roadmap and alignment between city council priorities, alignment between our mission, vision, values as a community, and doing a deeper dive with the community to find out what does that balance look like to them. Providing that space to have diverse opinions at the table and having our leadership engaged in what the future visions may be.
Thank you. No, we're good. So we'll go to question number 1 for Jim, and then we'll have Jim remain at the podium for question number 2. All right, Jim, so question number 1 is, how do you balance industry needs with community needs?
I think as I think about balancing and managing community needs and industry needs, you have to sort of step back and think about, in each case, what will make both successful. So as far as industry, obviously we want to see industry prosper. We want to see it to succeed because it creates jobs, economic vitality, and the backbone of an economy that allows the community to prosper and be successful. The community obviously has a vested interest in having industry be successful, but it also has a clear vested interest in making industry live up to certain standards, regulations, requirements, and otherwise. So the balance becomes, allocating those resources such that you're doing everything possible to create the most attractive, balanced, successful community that protects its environment, protects its lands, looks out for its future generations, does all those things that create an attractive quality of life, and finds a place in it for the industry so that the industry can make a profit, but can do so in a reasonable and responsible way. So I think there is a fair balance there that allows both to prosper, and that's the way we really have to look at it, and that's the way that I've always imagined as we look at economic development and working with industry, that the best economic development tool is a very successful, attractive community where people have good jobs, where the environment is attractive, where there's a good talent, good workforce, good infrastructure, all those things that want to bring people in. And that goes hand in hand with successful industry. So you can't have one without the other, but both have needs that have to be looked out for. So I think it is always a balance. Sometimes when you have more resources, when you're more mature as a community, you can make more regulations relative to that industry. Sometimes there is less ability to do that in communities that are struggling. So I think when you find yourself, as Broomfield is, a more mature, more attractive, more successful, progressive community, I think holding industry to higher standards is possible, and it also still allows them to be successful. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jim, and we'll have you stay at the podium for question number 2. In regards to the Civic Center, how do you bring the feel of the community into the current design?
I think that, as you look at designing a civic center, you want to create something that is very vibrant, that people want to spend a lot of time with. So that means it is multi-use, multi-purpose. It is very activated a lot of the time. It allows multi-generations to enjoy things together at different times. So typically that involves a lot of multi-use. So it is living, it's residential, it's commercial, it's entertainment, it's the arts, it's the civic component, which is already here. And I think as you bring stakeholders together and look at a planning process that imagines how to best activate it for the future, that those answers will come from that process. But typically, if it's an active, engaged process, what you'll typically find, and what we're seeing as successful throughout the country in some of these sort of town centers, we're moving away from very segregated kind of retail malls and other places for entertainment to realize that old is new again. The traditional old urbanist sort of downtown feel where everything was together, where people went to see, to be seen, to enjoy the other people's company, to enjoy performances, the arts, culture, to actually live there, to not be far away from where they're going to shop, where they're going to do government business and all these other things. That creates this sort of activated, attractive place that people want to be. And I think as you work through that process, it's very important to have all the stakeholders involved in the planning for it. But at the same time, I think most people will find that the economics of it in today's world say that it requires a lot of mixed use, and you have to have people actually living there, living close by, so that they can walk to and participate in those kinds of activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. All right, Jennifer, question number 2 on the Civic Center. How do you bring the feel of the community into the current design?
Well, first of all, we ask them. We provide a forum for them to come to the table. The Civic Center is something that is going to be a pivotal point for Broomfield as we move forward, particularly in the next 2 years. It's something that our community has been eager for about 8 years now. And moving forward, from the design phase into the implementation phase is going to take a significant amount of time and level of engagement. It's a great partnership. It's another opportunity for us to really have the voice, not only of the community of what they would like to see, but to work hand in hand with the partners, with our activated network of nonprofits, with our newly created 120th creative corridor that we're looking at. I think it takes preparation as well. So rather than having a destination place that stands up overnight, this is going to be a gradual process. We are fortunate to not only have an activated community and an engaged community, and now we have social media that allows us a different forum in order to get various opinions. We have an activated library and Audi, which is our auditorium. So we really have the capabilities to partner individually with independent departments to come together to have some creative brainstorming in addition to the community and the stakeholders, but to find out what activation we can do prior to that happening. How do we bring our community together in the space before we are able to do something with the Safeway building? How do we have the food trucks and the music and the diverse opinions and a forum so we can tell them and show them what the future holds with that destination place? We truly see this as being a gem in our community. It's important to all of us. We are eager to make that happen. Our departments are deeply engaged in what that future looks like. We're just entering into our master plan for our library and our cultural affairs. That will no doubt play a part, as will the strategic plan with our economic development.
All right, and Amy will reset the clock, and then we'll hear from Jennifer again on question number 3. Sorry, should have caught you at the podium.
Getting my steps in.
All right, Jennifer, please outline your views on the need and adequacy of mental health services in Broomfield and your ideas to address deficiencies you see.
So I greatly appreciate this question. It has been the forefront of our conversations in health and human services, in public health, at the library, at the rec center. There are multiple departments, our criminal justice, our PD. There isn't one department that hasn't been impacted by services that we need or desire with regards to mental health. We have been in a partnership with Boulder and a mental health provider that we have been going through a pretty labor-intensive review and service delivery gap, and that includes surveying our current citizens, city council's take. Again, from the chief's perspective, we have some pretty innovative projects and grants that we have been able to capitalize on. We're one of the only municipalities that's received a state grant. It's called the EDGE, and we deploy multidisciplinary teams that include mental health, along with our HHS workers. It has more than doubled, and I'm looking at the chief as I say this, the numbers that we originally anticipated. So not only do we know that there is a dire need in our community for it, but it's also an opportunity to, rather than saying one provider provides the service, how do we capitalize on other service providers that provide those gap services? We need to be mindful of what the services look like. We hope in HHS to get to the point where that is a community hub, that we are able to offer 8 to 8 services, that we are open on Saturdays and Sundays, that we have a vibrant approach, not only from the mental health perspective, but from substance abuse as well, that we are attacking not on the back end, but on the front end. How do we holistically provide these services that have a sense of resiliency for our community, training for those of us, I don't think anyone in here has not been touched by some type of mental health, certainly, or hopefully before it hits any of the criminal justice systems. I think we're well prepared to move into the future. I think we have the right people at the table. We're continuing the dialogue. with regards to a service delivery. And I think in 2 years, our service delivery model from a mental health perspective will look very different than it looks right now.
Thank you, Jennifer.
I have to admit that as the outsider, I have very little point of reference as to the existing mental health services that exist in Broomfield. So, you know, my information is limited. My research is obviously very limited. But when it comes to, you know, providing effective public mental health services, I think too often we see all across the country where we have a real focus on aspects of public health, and we give sort of short shrift to mental health services. And I think it becomes critical that any quality, robust package of public health service delivery has to include a very significant and well-developed and well-thought-out mental health program outreach. So I think as I would do anywhere, I would try to get up to speed as quickly as possible as to what resources exist here, what stakeholders are here, where are the gaps, and then talk about, you know, are there ways that we can go about, you know, filling in those gaps, and what is the best approach to it? I think like you would approach anything, but clearly I'm an advocate for, you know, high quality mental health services. I would think that this community would demand those kind of services, and would certainly want that to be among the priorities as we would be moving forward. But again, it's very difficult for me, and I would be disingenuous in suggesting that I know that much about the current service delivery or the methods that are used. So it would be presumptuous of me to, you know, give plans for the future other than to say that it's obviously very important and would look at it very seriously and bring the right people to the table to come up hopefully with the right answers.
Okay, thank you, Jim. We'll reset the clock, and I'll ask you question number 4. What ideas do you have for expanding the stock of affordable housing, both rental and home ownership, in the community?
I think when it comes to affordable housing in the community, we have to first and foremost recognize that someone has to build these properties, and they have to do so at a profit. So typically, if we're unable to be meeting the needs of affordability with our housing stock, it means that something about our process is not allowing the developers to build these projects and still come up with affordability. So what we like to do in those cases, look at the resources that we can put in place to fill those gaps. Is it low-income housing tax credits? Are there CDBG funds? Are there ways to alter the way we look at or provide incentives so that we can actually incentivize the building of affordable units? Is there trade-offs on some of the market rate units so that we can get affordable units built at the same time? So again, knowing what the resources are, what the incentives are, and what we ask of developers, we can then start to imagine and bring stakeholders together to say, what are our tools in this case to recognize the fact that someone has to build these, have to build them at a profit, but still at the same time recognize that there's going to be less revenue produced by these units because they have to be affordable. They're being rented for less money to people who have less ability to pay for them. So tax credits, other kinds of, can we bring faith-based community to play? Can we actually involve the private sector on some sort of donations? Can you do trade-offs on land dedication? Can you create other actual monetary incentives? I don't like to do punitive things. It doesn't work to say you have to do this, because saying you have to do it will not make it profitable. You have to find ways to say, okay, acknowledging the fact that we want you to build these, you still have to be profitable. Let's work together as partners to figure out how we can fill the gap for you so that ultimately we both get what we want, and that is you produce a housing unit that is profitable to you, but we know that there are affordable units being built for the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good answer.
Jennifer, question number 4. What ideas do you have for expanding the stock of affordable housing, both rental and home ownership in the community?
So when it turns out that the average home price in Broomfield is about 500 plus, it is a jaw-dropping number, particularly for those in the community that have been here any period of time. So whenever you can say that, geez, I'm glad I got here 10 years ago because I'd never be able to afford the house that I'm in now. I think the start for us has been a long time coming. I think the definition between affordable, attainable, retainable has been something that we as a community have struggled with and are preparing to embrace. I think the fact that our community and our council has charged an additional board and commission, which is our Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, to really dig deep and to figure out what the best fit for Broomfield is. So in addition to Jim's toolbox, it's difficult. Our land in Broomfield is a premium. Our stock is such that really finding and maintaining that balance and what that trade-off between residential homes, let alone affordable pieces of that. But from a community perspective, when we look at the number of jobs that we want to create, the workforce that we're bringing here, there has to be a shift. Our community has to begin to have the conversation about what it looks like and where it is. And is it a blended approach? Is it a systematic approach? It's C, all of the above. But one of the things that separates Broomfield from our other municipalities and communities is really tapping into that creative component between what we can offer from a local government perspective, the developers that we want to work with, that we are bringing to the table. Council has done a great job of having, when the developers come to the table, that affordable housing is now part of that conversation consistently. That didn't happen before. So I think it reduces the stigma of what affordable housing means and allows us to do, again, a balanced approach, which is key when we're looking at that long-term vision of who we are, capitalizing on the nonprofits. We had a kickoff today. I have to have a shout out for the Broomfield Resource Guide. It's something that we've been working on for about 18 months. It's now up and running. That's another great landing place for all of us to come together from a workforce perspective, an economic development perspective, council perspective, priorities perspective, and what our future looks like in Broomfield.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Yep.
I'm getting it. I'm getting it.
Question number 5. Why is it important for nonprofits in the city and county to collaborate to meet the needs of the community?
So that's a great segue to what we were just talking about with regards to affordable housing. I was at a meeting, so now it's story time, right? And some of the best lessons are from some of the stories that we've had. We had a citizen that drove conversation when we had the government shutdown. We deployed the right people to the right place in about 48 hours. We discovered that we were going to do something called the Broomfield Love Day, because there is no community that shows the love more than Broomfield, and that we can deploy quickly and effectively. Turns out that our nonprofits, we had about 21 there at Broomfield Show the Love Day. P.S. We have another event that's coming in July for a back-to-school event. But it's a great microcosm of our community and the fabric of our community to be able to bring like-minded and diverse-minded individuals together between the nonprofit base in conjunction with our local government funds to teach and then hand off. The Broomfield Resource Guide that I mentioned just a moment ago is a perfect example of what that looked like. A lot of the nonprofits are not funded to the point to where they can have graphic designers or strategic planners or any of those auxiliary services that come naturally to us in many of our departments. So combining that goal, combining the fortitude that we as a community have to provide services to those, and I don't want to say less fortunate, but the community as a whole, that really was what Broomfield Show the Love Day was about. There was no stigma about affordability. It was the first time that we were able to take Precious Child and do a pop-up boutique, which has now become a staple in our HHS building. Emails coming through today from Dana Scott, our other really wonderful partner of Fish. We are planning on, once again, collaborating on our third grant from a multitude of nonprofits, with the Broomfield community being the hub for participating in writing the grant and doing some of the legwork in order to execute what that outcome can look like. And I only see great futures ahead for us to continue this collaboration.
Thank you. Jim, question number 5, do you want me to repeat that for you? Okay.
Our nonprofits really need to cooperate and collaborate really for one primary reason, and that is resources are scarce and needs are many. So when you look at the United Way model, they basically have said it didn't make sense for all of these nonprofits to be fundraising independently and in effect sort of competing against one another. Let's recognize the fact that they all do critically important things, and we sort of put this united front together and work together collaboratively. And all the nonprofits usually rely on fundraising, they rely on volunteers, they're out in the community doing as much as they can. So to the fullest extent possible, when we can cooperate and collaborate, then the resources go farther. We can be certain that there's less redundancy in services, that when we're communicating together, we know that we are covering all the bases as well as not duplicating them. And we're making certain that people can recognize where the resources are and how to best mobilize them to the best places. So I think we see the same thing in government all the time. Resources are very scarce, and when jurisdictions can cooperate and collaborate, then they eliminate some of the waste, some of the redundancy, some of the duplication of services. They communicate more effectively on where service is necessary and how to mobilize resources. And clearly the same thing goes for our nonprofit sector. So more than anything, it's really, it's almost a necessity. When the resources aren't there and the needs are so great, you just have to work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. All right, we'll move on to question number 6. This is a 2-part question for you, and if you need me to repeat that, please just let me know. Part 1 is, have you done enough due diligence to come to the conclusion as to whether extraction, oil and gas is a good operator? And part 2 of that question is, what are your plans to ensure that extraction honors all of the best management practices in their MOU, and what steps will you take if they don't?
Again, as the outsider, I would never profess to believe that I have done enough due diligence to understand if the extraction, oil and gas is a good operator. That I'm sure you all are still, spending time, effort, and lots of due diligence on. Would you repeat the second part of that question, please?
Sure. Part 2 is, what are your plans to ensure that extraction honors all of the best management practices in their MOU, and what steps will you take if they don't?
I think when it comes to honoring, all the steps within a memorandum of understanding, we're talking about a contract. So you use all the tools that are available to a government to make certain that you receive compliance, which is effective, ongoing, recurring monitoring, using the terms of the contract and requiring compliance to its fullest, using the law to its fullest, using local ordinance, state law, and anything else that is necessary, and being ever diligent to make certain that you are appropriately, effectively monitoring and making certain that all terms of that agreement are being lived up to and fulfilled. And of course, to the extent that those aren't, that's when you look at sanctions or punitive measures. And again, not being that familiar with the agreement, I don't know specifically what's there and not as familiar with state law or local law, but again, you use the tools available to you and you compel compliance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Benefits of being an internal candidate and not so many benefits. I have to say that from a compliance perspective, our community have become resident experts. We are effectively engaged in oil and gas and compliance and following the MOU and the guidelines and questions that arrive every day, multiple times a day. We have deployed an oil and gas team whose main mission and task it is to ensure compliance with regards to the MOU, to monitor air quality, to engage with CDPHE, to engage with resident experts, to engage with our multitude of consultants that are there. Our council has been through, they're probably all PhDs in some respect with regards to oil and gas. We have our oil and gas task force that was instrumental in helping us navigate with the operator. Extraction. There were many ups and downs. There continue to be with regards to monitoring. With regards to the MOU, is extraction a good operator? We'll know in 3 years. We'll have a better sense every week. We're going to do our yeoman's best to continue to do whatever we can within our realm. We do have a new state law that has been passed that will be of added value, Senate Bill 181, that will help us with our existing toolbox for what is required as we move forward. Although the MOU with extraction won't be impacted by 181 because it is an existing contract. So what I can tell you is that we will continue to enhance our communication, to enhance our transparency, to allow for diverse voices to be heard, and to increase the level to which we communicate with each other, with council, and with the community as we move through uncharted waters for all of us. Thank you.
All right, question number 7, Jennifer. Don't step away yet. All right, what steps will you take to address homelessness or home insecurity in Broomfield, and home insecurity being folks who are struggling to keep a roof over their heads?
Thank you. So this dovetails nicely on our affordable housing piece. I know that when in years past we have one person that works on housing out of our community development department. She does and maintains the CDBHE funds, the Section 8 housing, but with regards to, and many other things. So if she's listening, I don't mean to discount what she does at all. It's a huge lift for one individual person. So we surround her with support from the other departments. Homelessness is something that not only nationwide, not only statewide, but we're seeing it more here. We didn't used to have the, I don't want to say an influx, but certainly our police department is on a first name basis with many of the individuals that are in our community. And when I say first name basis, I truly mean first name basis. So as those wraparound services, activating our nonprofits, continuing to have our community service and policing, continuing to activate folks from the library, we find that the library has such a good temperature on that homelessness population, particularly when it's cold, because the library is their landing spot. So when we're able to have wraparound services, do a deeper dive with regards to the community, when we get rid of the stigma that Broomfield actually does have homeless people here. The partnerships that we have with other communities that have assisted us with homelessness are looking for us to step up to the plate. And what that means is something that we're going to have to discover as we move forward. Again, I think it's part of a lot of the conversations that we have. I see the president of North Metro Chamber here. He and I serve as co-chairs on the board for workforce development. We spent a lot of time on developing those pipelines for individuals and understanding what a livable wage means. So we're not talking about just supplying a facility for the homeless. We're talking about what it means in order for them to stabilize, to become sustainable, and those wraparound services as we move forward. It's not an easy answer. I wish it was.
Thank you. Jim, do you need me to repeat question number 7?
If you would, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely. What steps will you take to address homelessness or home insecurity in Broomfield, and home insecurity being folks who are struggling to keep a roof over their heads?
I was just dealing with this issue back in Racine earlier this week. We have a sort of, to use the term, a sort of a flea bag hotel in town that sort of operates as de facto transitional housing, because it's one of the few places where people that really can't find housing anywhere else wind up. They can pay cash, they can be there for the short term. But unfortunately, we have lots of problems with this owner, this building owner, and we have so many different compliance issues. We're potentially having to shut down his facility. And in shutting down the facility, we're obviously very concerned that we'll displace people who really have no other place to go. And we'll actually be producing homelessness as the act of our own local government. So we're very concerned about that. So we have something we call a continuum of care. And it's something that I'm relatively familiar with in most of the jurisdictions where we've been, where you have all of the various stakeholders that really are involved in housing security, providing people some amount of housing, or health and human services, and they work together collaboratively to sort of plan for, various levels of people who can, be in transitional housing, who need an absolute housing shelter, who have the funds or the availability to be able to get into some of the Section 8 housing. Where is the housing? So more than anything, you want to bring together all of the stakeholders that deal with these issues, the people that know of and that have access to the resources, and the people that are doing planning for these kinds of issues, so that when everybody's together in the same room and talking about these issues, they can, again, share knowledge, share resources, and work to plan out whatever resources are there, both at the local level, the county level, and the state level, and of course sometimes at the federal level as well, to make sure that to the fullest extent possible, you can provide the best you can. And of course a big part of it always is the faith-based community too. There's no question that much of this falls on churches, it falls on charitable groups, and those folks wind up being sort of the provider of last resort. But they're an important part to the continuum of care. So it isn't just government, it is those groups as well. But the key more than anything is effective planning, being in constant communication, and looking to the future to make sure that you're identifying every possible resource there is and then putting them to their fullest advantage in terms of effectively using the housing resources you have or planning for future resources at various levels. Transitional housing, more permanent housing, and actual homeless housing as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Go on to question number 8. What are your thoughts on improving transportation options for Broomfield?
I think when you have a growing metropolitan area like this, transportation, transit is always a really big issue, and obviously it is a big issue here. So transportation, doesn't recognize boundaries or jurisdictions. So the most effective way to really plan long-term for transportation is to do it multi-jurisdictionally. Regional transportation authorities, short of authorities, cooperative efforts and working together, long-term planning with councils of government, with regional authorities, with neighboring communities, with the community itself, to plan multimodal, bus transit, light rail, bicycles, pedestrian, It also goes to your planning for the actual development, so that, is it transit-oriented in nature? Are you zoning and planning such that you're minimizing the need for transportation? Also today, we are seeing so many changes and so much technological revolution when it comes to transportation. Who knew a few years ago that we would have Uber and Lyft, that they would entirely, change the dynamic of the way taxis are used, that we have car sharing, that we have scooter sharing, bike sharing. It's a sharing society. So from a transportation standpoint, it seems like we can take really good advantage of that. Younger generations don't necessarily believe in owning individual modes of transportation. They would much prefer sharing something or using something that is owned in common. So I think that bodes well for the future, but we have to plan effectively for it. We don't have enough resources to keep on building roads and to keep on adding lanes to roads and think that that's going to be effective long term. It won't be. We also have autonomous vehicles that are coming. We've been involved in this recently and actually planning for some of it in our community, and it's not as far off as many people think. So it's going to change the dynamic of transportation too. But again, there's a lot of planning that has to go into that. Can you imagine the way that we have to plan traffic signalization, roadways, and other things if we're going to suddenly imagine that these vehicles are going to be entirely autonomous? The other thing that's going to happen is not just autonomous vehicles, not smart vehicles, but smart roads. The vehicles won't have to be that smart because the roads will be smart and the vehicles can be less so. So all of that is coming as part of transportation. I think this community, we all have to be at the cutting edge, but more than anything, planning, being out there at the cutting edge to prepare for it.
Thank you. Jennifer, do you want me to repeat the question?
No, thank you, though. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So transportation is probably one of our top 3 that is consistently discussed. Transportation is one of the top economic development conversations that we have. With the development that's on I-25 and Highway 7, there is planned in conjunction with CDOT. This is another great public-private partnership, what we refer to as a P3, for a transportation hub for northern Colorado. Our council and our staff has prided itself on not only being regional conveners. I can think of just off the top of my head too many acronyms for everyone else. But from the mayor and everyone that is on staff and council, from Dr. Cog to our multi-use projects, and for those of you, because you are Broomfield residents, 144th. So when I hear Jim speak about the roads of the future, I can envision it, and I'm eager to see that happen. And I think to myself, first things first. So Dillon Road and 144th expansion and the connection and what that means. Our regional cooperation between Erie and Longmont, Louisville, Boulder, Brighton, Commerce City, there is no way that we will be able to approach and attack transportation and any methods in order to assist movement. The managed roads on I-25, 36, bus rapid transit, although most folks in Colorado have a difficult time transferring light rail over to bus rapid transit. However, there's a difference between commuter rail that I'm sure our transportation planners thoroughly understood, but from a resident's perspective, it makes a significant difference: size of community, access to the arterials, and when you have a loop to be able to create what that looks like from I-70, I-25, 36, and up north off of Highway 93 and the Golden Exchange. From a regional perspective, we are not in this by ourselves. There's no way that we could fund it by ourselves. There's no way that we could creatively attack from a CDOT perspective in order to pull off what that hub looks like on I-25 and Highway 7. Some of our biggest developments are coming to Baseline, and it is key for the economic development in our workforce to have walkable, bikeable not only high-density communities, but again, have that accessible to our trails and our open space.
All right, thank you, Jennifer, and we'll have you stay at the podium.
I just can't quite.
All right, question number 9. What are your thoughts on the open land goal of 40%, and how will you contribute to this goal?
So there's just so many things that we could stand up here and talk about what sets Broomfield apart, and that is certainly one of them. To have that forethought with open space and to have a community that rallies behind the importance of having that happen. We have more trails than we do street miles. It is a goal that requires us to consistently remember why we had it in the first place, and that drives us to be able to really balance, as we talked about before, land use. Commercial development, residential development, staying firm to what our parks look like, what our trails look like, and what the connection looks like. It is imperative, and that's part of the fabric of the community. So regardless of when we have new residents that move in, many of them, that's one of the reasons that they move here, because we place a premium, it's a priority for us, and everything else kind of revolves around that. I think we're at 32%, 33%. Is 40% achievable? I don't know. But what I do know is it remains consistent in our long-term plan, our short-term plans. Every development that we do with regards to connection, we're very mindful when we do any type of trade-off with regards to not open space, obviously, but certainly from the open lands perspective. We're mindful, we're intentional, and we really align with the mission, vision, values of maintaining that really gold nugget for Broomfield. And what would I do in order to
contribute to this goal?
I don't think it's one particular thing. When you kind of come up in the Broomfield ranks, it's deeply embedded in who you are. So again, there's not plans that we review, master plan or a comprehensive plan, that that goal isn't firmly implanted in all of our dealings.
Thank you. Jim, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I think it's
right.
okay. As I was doing my research on Broomfield, probably one of the most remarkable things that I saw was that this community imagined itself and created a goal that would have, 40% open space, open lands. That is amazing. That is really unbelievable. You just don't see that. And obvious, it is very part of what this community is and what it believes in. And a community has to be authentic, and it has to have values and has to stick by those values. So I think it's quite impressive to know that very early on this community said that one of the things we value more than anything is the preservation of open space and open lands and having those available to our community and to our future generations, and we're going to stick by it, and we're going to have a goal that is really quite robust, quite remarkable when it compares to so many other places across the country. So, I applaud that. It's incredible. Obviously, the community wants to see it. It should be maintained. Having said that, you're also talking about affordable housing. And of course, as more lands are preserved and not built upon, there is the balance against which it does drive up the value of the remaining land. And it makes it more difficult, obviously, than to achieve things like affordable housing. So as the one value sort of comes up against another, then those more difficult questions are asked. And, in economics, we talk about marginal rates of return. So if you get to 32% and you're going to 40%, what is the marginal rate of return of 32 to 33 to 35, et cetera? Is it becoming more and more difficult, and are you pressing harder and harder against the ability to have affordable housing? So it's a wonderful value and a wonderful goal, but I think as you get closer and closer, that's when the more difficult decisions are had, kind of at the margins, to say, Do we press a little bit harder to reach that goal, or are there some other things that maybe are just as valuable that we have to be cognizant of? So, I think a manager's job is to help the community identify its values and its goals and make certain that they're meeting them, whatever those are. And in this case, if the goal is absolutely 40%, then we should work really hard to get there. But if there are other goals that we also have to be mindful of, then we have to say, then let's talk about some of the balances between them as well.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to question number 10. How do you feel your values align with Broomfield's values?
That seems to be a perfect segue, doesn't it? I love the discussion of values in local government because to me, I've always believed that you can't effectively imagine what an organization's future looks like until you first think about what do you value. Don't create a mission, don't create a vision, don't imagine priorities or goals or anything else if you don't know what your values are, because they've got to be consistent or you're never going to be successful. So I think that is critical. And the good news is I think this community has done a really good job of establishing what those values are. You put them up on the wall and you stick with them, and every year when you do your strategic planning, you talk about them again because that is the baseline of what you build your goals and objectives off. So the good news is it's really clear what the values of this community are. And I think that's why I'm here. That's why I applied for this job, and that's why I find this community so attractive, because to me, so many of the values that I have, that I've held dear for so many years, and that I've tried to instill in the communities that I've come into, are the values that have already been established here. So in that regard, that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
So from an employee perspective, from a staff perspective, from a stakeholder perspective, from a nonprofit perspective, we live those values. It is who we are. And that is, it's clear when we do new hires and we take time and effort to recruit the right fit. Not necessarily the right people, but the right fit for who we are and the direction that we're going. We spend a lot of time on that fit process. And it's because from the mission, vision, and values, and I do think I think they do go hand in hand. The phrase here is we bleed blue. Our white glove approach to our citizens, a high service delivery, being accommodating, but in addition to that, being resident experts. You'd be hard-pressed to go to another municipality, and when they see Broomfield by our names, it's immediate credibility. It has been, it will continue to be, because we are consistently focused on driving that home. There isn't a day that we don't have that conversation. There isn't a plan that we don't put in place. We are seeking the consistent values that each one of us have in our hearts and in our heads. So we walk the walk here. And for folks that come in that don't, generally it's pretty clear that they would probably do well somewhere else. Because we are the A-team. We consistently deliver because we have that common denominator of those values and what it means. And when times are disagreeable or we find collective abrasion when we're moving through different initiatives or processes or implementations, that's our fundamental fabric that we believe in. It's those values. Thank you.
All right. Next question. What would you hope to accomplish in the first year as city and county manager?
So leadership. So when you hear the moniker of big shoes to fill, I don't know how that's possible. It's the first city-county recruitment that Broomfield's ever done. We've had 2 city managers since 1968. I was born in 66, so I have it by 2 years. What we have in place is strong, and it's thoughtful, and it's consistent, and we care about each other, and we love the citizens and the community. I think the first year, and that's really what, when you have a new city manager that comes in, the transition needs to be thoughtful and intentional and smooth for our employees and for our community. It has to be something that we think through, and the implementation needs to follow a certain cadence. I think the city manager's office now is well balanced. We're like a three-stooled pod. We complement each other on the skill sets. My style is very different from Kevin Stanbridge and from Charles. I have a sense of urgency that I don't contemplate having, but it's inherent in who I am. I think from having that sense of urgency combined with the deep fabric of our relationship is going to make a really beautiful partnership. I think having the capability to see what the future is, I'm competitive. I own that. I have worked very hard to direct that, shall we say, in ways that it's a totality of circumstances. I think from the big picture, and having people that are in the right places. I foresee a year of change. I foresee a year of stability. I foresee a year of creative abrasion as we move forward and people get accustomed to my style, and relying heavily on direction and coaching and guidance from our existing leaders that have really set up a succession plan that I think as a community we should all be proud of. Thank you.
I think in local government, when we talk about accomplishment, particularly in a time frame, in this case 1 year, we talk about accomplishment for the organization, not just one individual. And how do you measure accomplishment? I think it's about establishing very clearly what is expectation and then working to meet that expectation and exceed the expectation. So my goal for accomplishment in a year is identifying very clearly how we can best understand the determination of what is expected. And I think you do that through effective strategic planning. So there's a process in place already to do strategic planning. You do it well. So making certain that the organization, the entire organization, understands clearly what the expectation is, and then makes certain that it has methods and process and effective communication in place to meet that expectation and to exceed it. Because, as Jennifer said, if you're competitive, you want to succeed on behalf of the organization, you want to do well. You want to do as well as you can. And that is measured in a local government organization by saying the community, through its representative democracy, city, county, council, has a process to determine what they expect to be done, the level of quality and skill that they expect it to be done with, and a time frame that it should be done in. So that gives us the roadmap. And then, in effect, we work really hard, not just to meet that, but to better it, to exceed it. So a year later, I think that accomplishment would be measured very clearly by, did we very clearly identify expectation? Did we meet it? Did we exceed it? And would our bosses, the city, county, council, say the same? And so that's the way I would look at it.
Thank you. Question number 12. Why is diversity and equity important to local government?
Diversity and equity is important to local government because local government needs to reflect its community. And most of the communities I've seen have a lot of diversity. and they demand equity if you're going to have happy, healthy, successful people. If you're going to have a happy, healthy, successful, prosperous, and stable government long term, it has to reflect its community, and its community is diverse. It demands equity, it's getting more diverse in the future, and it's getting more concerned about equity. So, you're only going to be as successful as the lowest among you, and we have to be concerned about equity. And I think it's the job of government. It's not necessarily the job of business. It's not necessarily the job of other entities. Government does that which can't be done oftentimes by others. So in this case, we have to be very concerned about making certain that we're paying attention both to diversity and equity so that ultimately not only our community will be successful, but we'll be creating a model for the community so that for those that aren't required to do it, they will see that when you do it, you can have success with it and you can have a community that succeeds long term. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is one of my favorite topics. Our community over even the last 7 years have grown in diverse opinions, diverse people, diverse topics. Inclusion is what our role is, providing that space and allowing all voices to be heard, allowing stigmas to be reduced with regards to inclusion and diversity. Internally, we have started an initiative that is run by our employees that has target approaches to diversity and inclusion. So rather than talking about it, Broomfield's community is sweeter, it's deeper, it's richer, and it's becoming more so every day. And for those of us that are charged with providing that space, providing those opportunities for dialogue, for initiatives, for projects, for multilingual, it will serve us well because we will be prepared for that community voice in all respects. We have a really significant Hmong population. We have a Russian population. Our Hispanic population continues to grow. So honoring and valuing, I think we have a really great opportunity through the collaborative efforts that we have with our nonprofits to explore what that looks like. Some of it's new to Broomfield. Some of the conversations that are deep and rich are new to Broomfield. How do we manage those? How do we embrace those? How do we prosper in that rich, deep community that we're about to, I don't want to say embark on because we're already seeing it. Our communications department, our community development department, how do we embrace, so a lot of the individual developers and private-public partnerships that we are looking at embrace diversity already. The employees that want to come to Broomfield, residents as well, they want a melting pot. It's heading in that direction. And again, how do we have a structure that's in place to provide input? What does our community engagement level look like? We're very good at from a staff level, of anticipating what demands and questions are, but really opening up that dialogue through our community engagement programs to figure out what they want. Sometimes it doesn't really mesh with what we want. Question number 13, 14.
It is question number 13. How do you navigate the relationship between council and staff?
With mindful intention. Even prior to being in the city manager's office, it's like anything else that we do in city government, local government, private sector. It's about relationships. It's about, my pops always used to say, Don't ever ask something of someone unless you've sat across the table 3 times and asked nothing. It has served me well. It's not about agreeing. It's not about disagreeing, although it's a challenge oftentimes, because sometimes you have to have the backbone instead of the wishbone to be able to say, I'm going to tell you what you need to hear and not what you want to hear. And you are only able to do that and have the freedom to do that when there's been a relationship that's been established, that there's a level of respect and credibility, and that you are able to take guidance, leave your ego at the door. A wise person once told me, it's remarkable what you can get done when you don't care who gets credit. I find that to be a common theme in Broomfield. We get a lot done because we don't care who gets credit. I find it oftentimes pretty fascinating. I don't think I would run for city council. It's the what particularly Broomfield City Council, because it's like sub pay, right? It's almost they're paying to be on city council, and the work that they put in. So from and not just a work as in a tangible work product, but physically, emotionally, 24/7. It's constant. So from a staff perspective, we are mindful of that. We are mindful of what it means to be supportive, to be responsive, to have follow-up, to have structure. We pride ourselves on not having time go by where they have to ask us twice. And I think when you're surrounded by people that have that like-mindedness, we form deep personal and professional relationships with council. I've been here long enough that I've had about 8 different councils. And I have to say that this one, not because I'm doing a plug or anything for the position, but truly, I have not experienced a council having gone through what these individuals have gone through for the last couple of years. And I'm proud to be here, and I appreciate it.
I believe the question was, how do you navigate the communication between city council and staff? That's something I've been pondering now for 31 years, because for 30 years I have worked for city councils. And I thought about this the other day, and I think I have probably worked for at least 150 different individuals along the way. The youngest being 18, the oldest probably well into their 80s, maybe approaching 90. Every single one of them has been different, and I think that's the key, that these are very, very different individuals who come from very different perspectives. They come to council for very different reasons. They come there to be heard, they come there to make a difference, and they want to find a way to make that difference. And the manager's job is to understand how to help them be successful. And each of them oftentimes needs very different means by which they want to communicate, they're comfortable communicating, and the way that they do business. So the manager's toughest job is this process of making certain that they all get adequate information, they get it at the same time in the same manner, but knowing that they also like to communicate very differently. So you have to do both. You have to find ways that the counselors can satisfy their need and their desire to communicate in different means, but not to keep information from anyone, or to not share it fully with anyone, or to make it different for anyone. And to transfer, to distill, and to carry those messages onto staff so that ultimately that important information coming from council can then be transferred, translated into effective public service delivery. And if anything, more than anything else, that is what defines a manager, particularly a successful one. How do they take and transfer this series of communications from very, very different people who see the world differently and communicate very differently, take it in, distill it, and then transfer it to this professional staff so that they in turn can serve the needs of the community fully in a way that fully satisfies these very different group of people to the fullest means possible. That is not easy. I'm still working at it, and hopefully one of these days I'll be really successful. But that's what keeps me interested. That's what keeps me going. That's what a good manager does.
Thank you, Jim. We'll move on to question number 14. There are a lot of projects in Broomfield. Pick one of these: baseline, Broomfield Community Center reconstruction, or improved internet connectivity, and tell us how you will add value to this project.
I think probably I'll pick the Civic Center just because in my career I have focused more than anything else on community and economic development, particularly with very complex projects that involved innovative or creative financing that were difficult to accomplish, that needed to bring lots of stakeholders together, that typically maybe didn't have success in the past or was very difficult making it work, and then we found ways to do it by being more creative, more innovative, finding new ways to do things, finding better ways to negotiate, finding better understanding of how you make things successful from a partnership standpoint, and bringing certain levels of empathy so that diverse stakeholders can come together in a way that they maybe couldn't have before because somebody found a way to sort of bring those together. So I have a tendency to get more energized when it comes to economic development, community development, and redevelopment on projects that are difficult, that are complex, that involve lots of different partnerships, and that require something that is rather creative and innovative. So when you ask of those various projects, I will pick that one because that tends to be something that would really energize me. And because of the past things that I've worked on and the things that we've had success with, I would say that I probably would bring more value to something like that than necessarily one of those others.
Thank you.
So I would have to pick Baseline, which is the 950-acre development off of I-25 and Highway 7. We have been working on Baseline for, well, I personally have been working on it for about 8 years. I know that Charles Ozagi has been working on it in his mind for about 15 years. It is a perfect example of another public-private partnership without which we would not be able to carry it off. We have deep relationships with the Butterfly Pavilion, which is one of the reasons that they are going from Westminster's footprint to Baseline development, Adams 12 school districts, the Mortgage Family Foundation, and the developer, of course. I don't know anybody else in the state of Colorado, defer to the developers for the planning department rather, that you have one developer that takes up 950 acres. Generally, you're going to have 5 or 6 developers. You're going to have different agendas. You're going to have different financial criteria. You're going to have different schools of thought on what should be developed there. It's a unique opportunity for us in Broomfield to really envision what the future looks like. It incorporates our workforce, it incorporates economic development, transportation, trails, the capability to learn in a STEM environment. In fact, a lot of what we have embodied here in Broomfield comes from the educational environment, which is called problem-based learning. It's a STEM term, but it's applicable not only throughout the local governments, but certainly from a private sector as well. We've been able to deepen those relationships to have a collaborative process to really envision what that future looks like. It has allowed us to involve and engage all of the departments. So when you have the choice between the BCC and our fiber optic network, it really does incorporate all of those components for each one. We had a Smart Cities meeting just yesterday. Part of the Smart Cities is really the totality of circumstances when we talk about development, mindful development, and how do we incorporate all of those components into not only in one central landing place of baseline, but throughout this community. It will be a great opportunity for us to kind of flex our muscles a little bit, and I don't mean these muscles. I mean intellectually of what the future holds.
Thank you. All right. What steps will you take to address the opioid addiction issues in Broomfield?
So this is another great dovetail with some of the community policing and mental health and subsistence and public health. And the opioid crisis has impacted all of us. We hear about it continuously from a national level and particularly a state level. I don't know if anyone has not been touched by some type of substance abuse, whether it be opioid or some other form of substance abuse. Another thing that I think separates Broomfield, when we talk about the fabric of involving that pipeline or that continuum of care with regards to any type of treatment modality, our jails have become central landing places for dual diagnosis, which is substance abuse and some type of mental health. As those resources, I don't want to say dry up because they've never been there. State legislature this year, one of the great things that they've done is they pump more money into that system. How do we effectively utilize our existing fabric of our community to capitalize on those funds that are coming in? We're having conversations about homes that are in our residential areas, the impacts, the stigma. It really touches all topics. So we know that it's ripe, the conversation in Broomfield. I think we have the right people at the table with regards to maybe not finalizing the conversation, but certainly what it means to get in front of it. Is there and are there ways that we can impact the front end while they're going through it, and what does that continuum of care look like afterwards? Our chief and our police department do a yeoman's job when they're releasing folks. We find that the highest ODs occur as soon as they're released because they've been clean for a really long period of time. And then they have one more shot, and then that sends all of us into a responsive nature versus a proactive. So we have to find, I don't even want to say balance because that term's been overused tonight, but we have to be able to have those conversations about that continuum of care and what it looks like from the beginning and the middle at the end, and allocate those cost mechanisms and what that looks like, and have a structure in place that when we do go get those grant funds and or the lawsuit turns out, we already have a place to drop those funds into that structure instead of coming from behind trying to create it after we already have the funds. Thank you.
Question is, what would I do about the opioid crisis? And I think what I would do is, hopefully what any good manager would do, is to look to the organization and to rely on and to support and to champion those resources that we have in the organization who are subject matter experts and who can bring their talent to bear on this issue, and make certain that I listen very, very closely to what their needs are and to how they're defining what this crisis looks like and what resources they need to better combat it, and make certain that they have good quality interaction with others that are working on the same issues, so that our police department, our fire department, our public health department, other human service agencies within the area that are working on similar things, to listen intently and understand what their needs are, and make certain that I am an advocate and a champion for accomplishing success within the areas that they're working on that they've identified as critically important. And that's the thing about a manager. A manager is someone who brings scarce resources together, brings component parts together, and makes a whole that is greater than just the sum of those parts. And you have to recognize that you're not an expert at a lot of different things. You have a very talented organization that have skills in these areas, and in this particular area is not my skill level. You know, I'm not a clinician, not a practitioner, I'm not in public health. I've been around a lot of folks in law enforcement and the fire service and public health and some of these things, but only tangentially. It's their business. But I certainly can be a champion and an advocate for them and listen very, very closely as to what the needs are and how do we find resources and how do we work to achieve, you know, the goals that they have. So that's the way I would approach it.
Thank you, Jim. We'll move on to question number 16. What do you know about the Windy Gap program, and what is your plan for completing the financing of this project?
It's my understanding, again, only based on my research as part of this process, that this involves the long-term future provision of water for the community. I think there's reservoir involved, and it's the idea of securing a long-term water future. I am not familiar with what has been proposed or how it's being proposed to finance it. However, I have done an awful lot of complex public finance over the years, particularly attached to water facilities, water treatment facilities, water rights purchases, and a lot of other things attached to water. So while I can't say that I know all that much about it, I think that I do have the background and the skill level that it wouldn't take long to understand it well and to bring some value to the issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
So along with our goal of having open space, our predecessors were thoughtful enough to, again, set Broomfield apart from other, not only communities, but other regions in the state of Colorado, and that is because we have secured water through build out and beyond. Our neighbors to the south, again, it impacts our economic development capabilities because it's not a box that they need to struggle in order to check off. The Windy Gap firming project is something. And again, our resident expert, David Allen, who's the director of Public Works, has done an exceptional job of identifying when the water rights are most resourceful for our purchasing. The location of the firming project from an EPA perspective was a little shaky there. We're thinking that we're on the tail end of that. Financing, like anything else, from our financial resources and 5-year plan into the comprehensive plan, it's something that we've been planning on for, I don't know if decades is an overstatement. Every time I use that word, I hedge a little bit. But we are confident it's not something that, I don't want to say we won't struggle financing it because we don't know what the future holds, given that we do an annual allocation and we are zero-based budgeting. So we have to line item every year for that justification. But our water is significant. It is a separate fund. We keep it that way so that we can check that box off. Thank you.
All right, question number 17. Can you describe an experience where you had to engage the community in an issue that sparked diverse opinions from citizens? What was your approach and the outcome?
So I think, I don't want to use oil and gas because it's just so obvious. We've had neighborhoods, so let me think about that just for a moment. Is it one citizen or is it a group?
It says diverse opinions from citizens.
So when we became a city and county, there are county functions. We always like to say we're a city that that manages a county. And there are requirements that for services that we have to provide. Health and Human Services is one of those. Department of Motor Vehicle is also one of those. I'm going to use this for an example just because it's recent, so it's fresh for me. When you're talking about motor vehicle, and the approach that I'm about to outline is the approach that we take regardless of what the situation is. A, we're responsive. B, I think we do a great job of modeling and walking in the path of hearing all of the opinions, not necessarily injecting our own opinion, but providing that forum so that we can educate even when the answer isn't something that the resident wants. Generally, 95% of the time, I think we're successful in that. Oftentimes, understanding what the situation is and the parameters that we work under, the residents respect that. Sometimes they leave and they don't necessarily agree with what that looks like, but having that conversation is helpful. We're a pass-through for the state, which means that we have to follow the state rules and regulations. Our community expects that we are able to control and monitor and modify and adjust based on the community needs. There's a lot of times we can do that. Department of Motor Vehicles is not one of them. So it takes a highly experienced, collaborative, engaged, polite, patient staff to be able to sit and have that communication. We facilitate communication with other departments, whether they be state or federal level. Generally, we try to do it on site. We do our homework. We become well-versed in whatever that topic is. And generally, again, we seek to have an equitable resolution, which, again, I'm trying to think of when we didn't reach a resolution of at least where they were satisfied and by the fact that they understood. May not have liked the answer. Now I'm finished. Thank you.
An issue or initiative that involved a lot of diverse opinions of citizens that we worked through. I will go back to when I became city manager of Gastonia, North Carolina, and I was coming in and I realized we had a system of collecting solid waste, which was based on property taxes. It had no correlation between what you used and what you paid for. It looked like you could throw out as much as you possibly could and there was no consequence to it economically, but you had to pay for recycling, so there was a disincentive both economically and environmentally to actually do the right thing. So we knew we had to change this substantially, but we didn't imagine that we could just come forward with this, all-together plan and say this is what we ought to do. So we put together a very, very diverse group of citizens. We asked them to serve for what would be likely a year on a committee to really delve deep into this issue and to become educated on what we were doing and if there were better ways to do it. So we held meetings every single month with this very diverse group of citizens, and we took a different aspect of the solid waste management program each month, and we laid it out and we let it become something that they could ask every question in the book on and understand it, and then we would prepare the next month from staff to do it again and to let them hash it out and understand it. And as we worked through this over the course of that year, they started to understand and they started to move in a direction that was really organic in the sense that as they understood it better, they started to realize what was wrong with the system, and they started to carry that message to others around them, and they started to coalesce around an answer that ultimately became a recommendation at the end of that from the committee that said, yeah, we need this to be fee-based, it needs to be pay-as-you-throw, it needs to have the recycling not look like it's costing money, we need to have disincentives for throwing out more and incentives for recycling more. And they put that all together as a plan that we assisted with them, ultimately went to council, ultimately got approved. And the only way that ever would have gotten approved, obviously, is because we took the time and a lot of people and a lot of education over time to understand it and to allow it to be organic coming from this committee rather than, bring it forward whole cloth and say, gosh, we've been doing this wrong and this is the way we ought to do it. So I think we recognized in advance that this was a big issue. It would take a lot of education, and more than anything, it would take the community itself, some representative group of it, to figure this out and to come forward, and it wouldn't happen overnight. And that was the process we used.
All right, thank you. The next question is, what is your approach to innovation?
I think my approach to innovation has always been to instill in the organization and those around me that innovation is not only acceptable, but it is desirable. And in order to do that, you have to allow people to fail. Because if you're not allowed to fail, then you're never going to be open enough and willing enough to try to be innovative, because you're so concerned that, in failure, there will be punitive action against you, that, you'll either be embarrassed or you'll be punished or something will happen, that there's little room for innovation. And then I think everybody starts to look the same and talk the same and want to do what they think is the best and that is the status quo and whatever. So if you really want innovation, you've got to cultivate innovation and create an environment that makes it very clear you're allowed to try, you're allowed to fail, and so long as the failure isn't catastrophic, you're allowed to continue to try to innovate, because innovation only comes from trial and error. Now in government, we don't like that idea of error, and trial is kind of a bad word too. But I think in a very controlled environment, there is opportunities in government to be inventive, to be innovative, to test, to try, and to have small failures, to learn from the small failures, and in turn, figure out innovation as a result. So I think you have to cultivate that environment, you have to work hard at it, you have to model it from above and make certain that people know and understand that it's okay and it's desirable to be innovative.
Thank you. Jennifer, same question, and this will be the last question that we have time for.
Really? So innovative initiatives have become more than initiatives here in the city and county of Broomfield. We live it, we breathe it. It's been a shift and a process. Some departments have struggled through it. Some departments are entering into it now. Some departments have adjusted, and some departments have embraced it. We started a program a year ago of some handpicked individuals in the organization. We started something called the Innovative Ecosystem. We didn't look to where they were, what their titles were in the organization. We only looked for representation from each one of the departments. And we selected those individuals based on attitude and aptitude to drive projects, something that was tangible, so that all of us could get a taste of failing fast and pivot. From a governmental perspective, we are driven to innovate. We innovate from transportation perspective, we innovate from IT perspective, from the fiber optic network perspective, from how we deliver services, to pay online, to, in fact, I can't think of a department that is not impacted or would be beneficial to have some level, high level of innovation. Yes, it needs to be managed. Yes, it requires skill-based training, but innovation comes with change management. Change management comes with process improvement. We have discovered by failure and pain that process improvement before the people side isn't effective. As soon as we flipped that and we went from a change management blended curriculum into innovation, into process improvement. It was a marriage that is, in fact, sustainable as we move forward. So when we talk about our evaluations from department heads all the way down, the conversation is about shift. And oftentimes we always say, geez, if somebody else was in this room, they could really benefit from this. And what we try to do here is we individualize what value are you adding every day? What difference are you making every day to embrace an innovative approach which is kind and thoughtful and difficult? Change is difficult. Innovation means change, and it means radical change, and it means consistent change. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thanks to everyone for submitting some great questions. We appreciate it. We will now provide the candidates the opportunity to provide closing remarks to the community, and each will have 3 minutes for these comments. And Jennifer, will have you start.
So it's an honor to be here tonight. It feels like everything in my my professional life and personal life has led up to this particular moment. To be selected as one of the 2 candidates to lead this organization is not something that I would have even thought of 5 or 6 years ago. We were talking in the back before we came out tonight that family's first. And so between my husband and I and the family commitment, raising to this level requires a high level of commitment, not only residing in Broomfield, but it's a full-time, 24/7, all-encompassing position. And I would not have been ready for it because my kids wouldn't be ready for it. My last one is now a freshman at CU. I'm energized. I have the background. I have the pedigree. I have the coaching and mentoring. I have the community connections. I feel confident that I can walk in the shoes. And for the betterment of Broomfield, we always say Broomfield first. When there are the most difficult decisions, we remove ourselves personally from these decisions. And we say, what is best for the community? And we do the right thing for the right reason, not for each other necessarily. I look forward to embracing the fabric that's been laid before us, to building a comprehensive and collaborative environment for council and for this community, and picking up where others have left off and left us such a vibrant, wonderful community to lead. I thank council for selecting me. I hope I'm making it a really difficult decision. And I'd like to thank HR. From a candidate's perspective, it's been seamless. I don't know what it was like behind the scenes, but we sure appreciate your work. And from the community perspective, thank you all for being here. It reminds us every day of why we're here and what we do. So thank you.
Thank you all very much for coming out tonight. I think it speaks really, really well for your community, the fact that so many people will turn out in the middle of the week to come and listen for 2 hours to this process. Thank you to all the employees who showed up at last week's forum and participated. I thought that was overwhelming. It was amazing. I've never seen a process like this. Thank you to the City Council for putting together a process that's as good as I've seen this done. Thank you for allowing me to participate. I am assured at this point that whoever you pick, it's going to be the right choice, because you've followed a process that has been thorough, it's been comprehensive, it's been complex, it has vetted everybody to the fullest degree, and more than anything, I think you're going to understand the fit that you need. And as a result, whoever you pick, you're going to have picked the right candidate. And I feel comfortable with that. I feel good about that. And I think that's the way everybody should feel when these things come together. So in the end, you've been gracious, you've been wonderful hosts. This is a magnificent community. It's the reason that I'm here trying to get this job, because you are a magnificent community. Make no mistake about that. If you pick me, I will be thrilled. If you don't, I will be equally as thrilled, because you're going to have a great candidate if that's the case. And either way, thank you so much for doing what you've done, and I wish us all the best of luck. Thank you very much.
Great. All right. Thank you, candidates, for your thoughtful comments. You've worked pretty hard, and everybody gave you a round of applause, and that was kind of the next step, so thank you for taking that. Now we need the input from you all. As mentioned early, City Council will decide who will be the next city and county manager for the city and county of Broomfield. As they make their decision, your insights on these candidates will be of great value. Your comments will be considered alongside the feedback received in the other aspects of this recruitment. And if you haven't grabbed a comment sheet from the back of the room, please do so. You may also submit feedback directly to hr@broomfield.org by Friday, April 26th. And candidates will be available now, and this is a great time to ask any of those additional questions you would like to ask them. Again, thank you for your participation, and have a great evening. Thanks again for coming.